All right, so college football is just around the corner. So today we're going to do a full Big 12 preview and prediction. Let's get started. So, first up, there's a lot of changes in the Big 12 with college football realignment. You got Arizona, ASU, Colorado, and Utah joining the conference, which is now a 16 team conference. So, before I do team by team predictions for each of them, we're just going to kind of show a power ranking of how I view each of these teams in a vacuum. So first, the below average to bad tier is going to be a team that, with an average college football schedule, would be at most a 5-win team, 5-win or less caliber team. And here we have Cincinnati, BYU, ASU, and Houston. None of these I think are good teams, and I think definitely have a long way to go to be competitive in the conference. Next, we have the solid bowl team. So in a vacuum, about a 6 or a 7-win team. And here's where I have Baylor, TCU, and Colorado. Each for different reasons. I think Colorado obviously has the top level talent players like a Shedeur Sanders, a Travis Hunter, Jordan Seaton's a 5-star tackle they bring in. But with how much they use the transfer portal and players exit, I just don't think they have the depth of roster yet to be a top 25 caliber team. Then TCU, there is talent. They were really good a few years ago. But last year they weren't great, and I'm not sure if they're what level they're at yet. And then Baylor, I think they have upside at quarterback, but I have them at 12. Next, we got the top 25 caliber teams, and this is actually a very large section. I think the Big 12 is very possibly the deepest conference in the country. Definitely, I would say the most well balanced. And here we're going to have 9 is Kansas, 8 West Virginia, 7 UCF, 6 Oklahoma State, 5 Texas Tech, 4 Iowa State. All I think really good teams, and I think each one, I wouldn't be surprised by any of these teams winning the Big 12 and then therefore getting a spot in the playoff. But then my top contenders to win the conference are going to be 3-seeded Kansas State, 2-seed Utah, and then the team I think is the best in the conference is Arizona. Now, this is just the power rankings, so now we'll do team by team predictions and see how the schedules affects this ranking. All right, so first up, we got the Cincinnati Bearcats. I think the strengths of this team are going to be in the O-line, and then they brought in some decent portal additions. Probably going to have new quarterback, but I think you'll have decent run game because of that O-line, and that'll be the strength of the offense. I think weaknesses is this team that hasn't recruited very well and is going to be at a talent deficit in most games they play. And then the defense last year was not great, and I don't see major signs of improvement. Now getting to the game by game, I do think you're clearly more talented than Towson, and I think you win that. And then Pittsburgh, it's a pretty close game. Neither team I think is very good, but I think because Cincinnati's at home, I'm going to give you the win. And then Miami of Ohio on the road could definitely see you losing this game, but I think this is the game you win. I think the game Cincinnati has a talent advantage. They've got decent coaching. I think they'll be able to win those. And then Houston, I think Houston maybe a little bit better than Cincinnati. Cincinnati's at home. It's kind of a 50-50 game. It's tough, but I think Houston's going to beat you. I think Donovan Smith at quarterback makes a few more plays than Cincinnati's quarterback. And I think overall Houston's just able to make a few more timely plays to win this game. Then you go on the road to Texas Tech, who I think is going to be a very good team this year. I think they're going to put up a lot of points on Cincinnati. Don't think Cincinnati can keep up. You get your bye week, but then you have a really tough road game against UCF, who's going to have really great run game. I think they're going to be too hard to stop in the run game and beat Cincinnati. Then home game against Arizona State. Definitely one of the more winnable games on Cincinnati's schedule. Arizona State also a team that's lacking depth of talent. Also quarterback questions there. I think this is maybe the most winnable game for Cincinnati in conference, and I'm going to give Cincinnati the win. Then you travel up to Boulder, Colorado, where I think Colorado, too much firepower. I think they beat you. You get your bye week in a pretty good spot. If you want, it's a decent spot to get at because you have a chance to rest before playing a pretty good West Virginia team, and then you can have a chance to upset West Virginia. Unfortunately, I think West Virginia, a little too good this year, is going to beat you. Then back-to-back road games against superior teams. I think they beat you there. Then a home game against TCU. Should be starting Josh Hoover at quarterback. It could be tight, but I think TCU's kind of maybe by the end of the season got a few more things figured out. Cincinnati's kind of disappointed by 4 consecutive losses. And I think he had on a 5th. Overall, I think it's a 4-8 season and a last place finish in the Big 12. All right, so next up, we're going to have Houston here, who I've tied in the 15th spot with teams you'll see later. I think the strengths of this are your QB. I think Donovan Smith. I think he's just a playmaker. He's got good size, pretty big arm. He's mobile. I don't think he's the best quarterback of the conference, but I think he can make some he's got high upside. So I think that he could potentially win you a game. He could also lose you a game. And then I put coach here because I think bringing in Willie Fritz from Tulane, I think is an upgrade over Dana Holgorsen. And I think last year the team kind of quit on Dana a little bit. So I think bringing in Willie Fritz is a big upgrade at coach. Weaknesses, I think, are experience. You lose players to the transfer portal. And overall, a lot of, even though it wasn't a very good team, you do lose a lot of returning. You lose a lot of production you had. So you don't have a lot of returning production. And then this is another team that struggled on defense in the Big 12. And again, I don't see why they would be a whole lot better this year. Getting into the game by game, I think UNLV in Houston. I think you start off the season with a win. And then this before you had to go to Oklahoma. And so you start off with UNLV. And I think you're able to get a win here before a big game. All right, so getting to the game by game here, I think you're able to start off with a win against UNLV. I think Houston not going to be a great team this year, and I think you got to win your home games against similar level opponents. I think you're able to do that against UNLV. Then at Oklahoma, I think Oklahoma, much more talented roster. You're going to have home field advantage. Their wide receiver core is great. And even Oklahoma's weaknesses, I would say, is more in the trenches. But even at that point, they're still probably going to be able to outplay Houston. This is a clear loss. But then I do think you're able to beat Rice. Now, Rice is actually an improving program in the American now. I think they're a decent team. But I think at this point, Donovan Smith, starting off the year kind of strong, he's making plays, gets a big win against Rice, carries that over, like I said, beats Cincinnati. And I think he's showing more of the upside early in the year. And then I think Iowa State at home, I think you actually have a chance pulling the upset. I think keep it pretty close, but I think ultimately Iowa State is just the better team here and is able to come away with the win. I think Rocco Beck there, Jalen Noel, pretty good O-line, defense is there. I think they're able to come out with the win. Then Friday night road game, just a really tough spot. A lot of times, I think I tend to just pick home teams on Friday night road games. I think that's just one of the hardest things to do in college football is win on the road. And then to do it on Friday night is just brutal. Going with TCU. Then you get your bye week before a tough game at Kansas. I think Kansas, assuming Jalen Daniels is healthy, the combination of him and Devin Neal is going to make for a really good run game. Devin Neal being one of the better running backs in the country and Jalen Daniels being a dual threat quarterback. And I think that run game is going to give Kansas the edge there. Then you get home against Utah, but I think Utah's just too good for. I don't think Houston's really able to compete with Utah. Utah is going to be even maybe not as physical as in the past on the line of scrimmage, but still physical enough to run the ball. And they've got improving skill positions. Cam Rising for like his 10th year of college football. I think Utah beats you. Kansas State as well. You are at home, but coming off 2 losses against two really good teams, you're kind of worn down. I think Avery Johnson, Dylan Edwards, Gibbons, I think there's running all over you. You get another loss here. You get your bye week, rest up, but then another Friday night road game against a better team, another really good offense with Fafita and McMillan at Arizona. Don't think you're able to win that. But now you have extra day of rest before playing Baylor at home, a Baylor team that didn't have the great year last year, maybe not great this year. I think you're able to get a win here. I think this is just a really competitive game. Probably comes down to the wire. A lot like the Houston West Virginia game last year, if you guys remember, with like the Garrett Green comeback drive and then the Donovan Smith Hail Mary. I think it's just one of those classic back and forth games that I think Houston's able to come up with. But then going on the road to end the year against BYU, I think you lose it. This one's another toss up against two teams I don't think are great. Probably disappointed by the year they've had, but I think home field advantage, I'm going to give it to BYU, and Houston's going to finish with a final record of 4-8. All right, speaking of BYU, we got them tied for Houston at 15. And these tiebreakers, these aren't official tiebreakers. I just listed them alphabetically, just for practicality. So the strengths of BYU are actually going to be their linebacker core. They got a couple potential Big 12, like all Big 12 selections there at linebacker. And then the wide receivers that they bring back had pretty decent production last year and could do some nice things. But weaknesses, you're bringing in a new quarterback, and it's kind of an unknown there. I guess maybe it ends up not being a weakness, and the quarterback is pretty good. I don't think the competition is finished yet, so I'm not sure who the starter is going to be, and neither candidate is really proven. And then another weakness, I think, is on the line of scrimmage, which is weird for BYU since they're usually going to have older players who are able to kind of bully out the younger players and have a pretty good O-line. But I think the O-line's a question mark this year. I think the defensive line is as well. And then, I just had to check the quarterbacks that are in competition. Sorry. Just want to make sure I get their names right. Gary Bohannon transferred in. That's right. He's probably going to win the job. Formerly of Baylor and USF. All right, let's read this. All right, speaking of BYU, we got them up next here, tied for 15. The order of these tiebreakers, just alphabetical. So the B comes ahead of the H here, just alphabetically for practicality. So strengths and weaknesses here. I think you returned some wide receivers who did some nice things last year. And, it's one of the better parts of the offense. And then the linebackers, I saw got a couple potential all Big 12 selections there at linebacker. And that's probably the strength of the defense. Getting to the weaknesses. Surprise weakness for BYU is actually the line of scrimmage play has a lot of question marks, which is unusual for them. And then at quarterback, I think Gary Bohannon probably going to start there. I know the competition not finished yet. He transfers in was once at Baylor, and then I think USF, and then now BYU. And I think obviously he hasn't had the most success in his prior stops and could be a weakness for this team. But I don't think it'll matter against Southern Illinois Salukis. I think that's pretty much a win. I don't know much about them, but if BYU loses that game, you're in for a rough season. Then a road Friday game at SMU. I think SMU better team with a really explosive offense this year. Road game Friday night, like I was saying, it's a loss. Then you're at Wyoming. Pretty good Wyoming team, but they are replacing Brandon Peasley at quarterback, so there's a lot of newness there as well. It's kind of 50-50 game for me, but I decided to give this one to BYU. Could definitely see this being a game that's lost. Could easily be talked into it, but I ended up giving them a win here in the out of conference before losses against Kansas State. Even though BYU's at home, I think Kansas State's running game, with the question marks of BYU on the line of scrimmage, too good here to drop this game against BYU. And then a road game against Baylor. I think Baylor does end up winning it. Baylor, another Big 12 team that's on a similar level to BYU. And I tend to favor home field when I think teams are on a similar level. Then you get your bye week before playing Arizona. Definitely a spot Arizona could get tripped up here. BYU is going to be well rested, Arizona is not going to be coming off a bye, so you're going to have that advantage. Then you're going to have the advantage. You're 2-3. You're under the radar. Can you sneak up on them? I think you probably get up to a lead, but I think at the end of the day, having Noah Fafita at quarterback and McMillan at wide receiver and a couple of playmakers like Takario Davis in the secondary, I think U of A is able to get a close win. Then another place for a trap game potentially, you get a home Friday night game against Oklahoma State, but I think because Oklahoma State can just lean on that O-line and Ollie Gordon, and I don't think BYU's D-line's prepared to stop that. I think it kind of nullifies the trap game effect. And then I think you also lose on the road at UCF. I think basically the theme of this is just going to be I don't think BYU's well prepared to stop the run. And there's so many good run teams in the Big 12. When you verse Ollie Gordon 1 week, and then after that you're at UCF, who has multiple running backs who last year had 1,400 yards, and then you couple that with KJ Jefferson at quarterback, and UCF's going to beat you. Then you get your bye week before playing in-state rival Utah on the road, who's a better team, and they beat you. Kansas, another really good run team, but you get them at home. You're on a 6-game losing streak. I think it's bound to snap at some point. I think you actually get a pretty big upset. I think when you get all these trap games or advantages, I think you're bound to get one. If you wanted to talk me into them upsetting Arizona off a bye, or you think it's Oklahoma State, I could see it. Ultimately, I thought Kansas was the game where they were going to beat a team that was better than them. But then I think you lose a game at Arizona State, who I think is in a similar spot of not being very good, but they're going to win, I think, at least one conference game. And I think this could be one of the ones they get. And then we already saw how I think they beat Houston. So they end up, like the other teams, 4-8. All right, so tied with BYU as well as Houston, we have the Arizona State Sun Devils. I put for their strengths, I think, skill players and coaching. I put coaching because I like Kenny Dillingham as a coach coming from Oregon, and I think a pretty good offensive mind. I think that's an advantage here. And then skill positions, I think you got a player like Scatabo, who's just a do-it-all type of player. He can run it, he's got to catch, he'll do returns, he might throw the ball, run some wildcat, and just a player that other teams will have to game plan for. And then transferring in Raleek Brown, just a burner, really fast from USC. Could play running back, could maybe play receiver, could also do some returning. So I think that's a strength, is just having a couple of dynamic, just playmaker types. Weaknesses, I put depth and experience because they're still bringing in a lot of new faces. And then similar to last year, they just don't have a whole lot of depth of talent to put bodies out there on a week-to-week basis and be competitive on the power conference level, or at least against the better teams. So getting to the game by game, you got Wyoming at home. Definitely a game I could see Wyoming winning, but I do see Wyoming losing because I do still think this is one of the games that Arizona State's going to have a similar talent level, maybe a talent edge here. I think it win it. And then you get another home game against Mississippi State, but I do think, even though it's a Mississippi State team that I do not think is very good, I think the caliber of athlete on Mississippi State is just still too physical for Arizona State. I think they lose, but I think they do beat Texas State, who's actually, this is a game Arizona State's got to watch out for. Middle of the week on the road at Texas State, who was pretty good last year with TJ Finley at quarterback. He threw the ball a whole lot of yards. So I think Wyoming, this is a sneaky tough opening 3 games. I got you going 2-1. Could definitely see them losing Wyoming or Texas State, though, and going 1-2. Then they're going to start off conference play on the road in Lubbock against Texas Tech, who I think's got a really good receivers core this year, good run game. I think they beat you. But then you get somewhat early bye week, but I actually do like it because I think it puts you in a good spot to prepare for a Kansas team, prepare for their run game, get up a good game plan. I think this is one of the games Arizona State pulls an upset. And then it's weird because I could definitely see the spot being the Friday night home game against Utah. But I think Utah's a little more familiar with Arizona State, playing them in the Pac-12. And then I think Utah is just the better team than Kansas. So when I was between which one I thought Arizona State would upset, because I basically thought they'd pull off one of these coming off the bye, I went with Kansas right off the bye. But then I don't think you're able to pull two big upsets off in a row. So maybe you're higher on Kansas. You think you would flip these games. Ultimately, I went with Kansas being the win for ASU. But I think you lose at Cincinnati, as talked about earlier. Then you get your second bye. You play at Oklahoma State on the road, though. Don't think this is the best place for a bye because you only well, you already saw it, but I don't think it's the best place for a bye because um then Then you get your second bye before playing Oklahoma State on the road. I think it's a loss. Don't think it's a great place for the bye because I don't think it really puts you in a good situation to pull an upset against a really physical, well-coached Oklahoma State team. UCF, I think it's another really good run team. I think Arizona State's kind of being beat down at the end of the year. Same with that Kansas State. But I think you get a win against BYU. Kind of you get a break from all these physical running teams. BYU's more at ASU's level. I think you get your second conference win before I think you lose to your rival Arizona pretty badly. Arizona definitely a better team than ASU this year and at home. So ASU's going to go 4-8. Next up, we got tied for 12th place. So this is where you see the jump from the teams I had in like that bad category. This is one of those teams that this is now a team that in a vacuum I think is around a 6-7 win team. Their strengths mentioned at the beginning of the video: top end talent and quarterback. Got you're really good at the wide receiver position. You got Travis Hunter there. You've got Amarion Miller, could be a breakout player after the flashes he showed as a freshman. Other good wide receivers, and then obviously Shedeur Sanders. He's shown flashes of being a great quarterback. Could he be the best in the Big 12? It's on the board. It's possible. Not sure I'd predict it, but he's definitely talented, has the ability. Now, weaknesses, I think, like last year, you're going to see are the depth of Colorado's roster, and then the line of scrimmage. They brought in a lot of transfer players to help out the O-line, but I think the O-line, there's still questions on will it gel and how good will those players be, and then how good will they be at stopping the run, I think is also a pretty big question. So now getting into the schedule. You start off with a home Thursday night game. Really, really tricky game here against North Dakota State, who I'm sure you guys know has been, the best FCS program over the past decade. And I'm giving Colorado the win here trepidatiously. I don't know why you would schedule North Dakota State. I haven't really looked into their roster this year, but I think historically a really good FCS team, especially recently. But I'm going to give Colorado the win. Unfortunately, don't think you beat Nebraska. Nebraska really improved team this year, I believe, with Matt Rule, second year under Matt Rule. Dylan Raiola coming at quarterback. I think it's a close game. I lean Nebraska here. I think they're a slightly better team, and they have the home field advantage. But now moving on, you're going to have at Colorado State. Obviously, this was a big game last year. All the hype around it with the comments that the Colorado State coach made about Dion. But I think Colorado's a more talented team here, and I think they play better than Colorado State in this game and get a win. Continuing, I think we talked about Baylor earlier, or we talked about them coming up, sorry. But I think Colorado State is able to beat Baylor. One, because I think in the beginning of the year, Colorado's a better team than they will be later in the year. So at this point, Colorado is still mainly healthy, and I think a healthy Colorado is a better team than Baylor, and they're at home. But then UCF, I think, is a really, really bad matchup for Colorado. I think the way they're able to run the ball, I think UCF is really well equipped to beat the teams without a really good defensive front because of how well they will be running the ball. And I think there's a lot of questions for Colorado's defensive front. Now, you get your bye week before Kansas State. I think this is definitely a game Colorado could win. I think it's really close. But I think, and you should mention Dylan Edwards' game, transferring from Colorado to Kansas State after being Coach Prime's, he's followed him his whole career. But I think Kansas State's a better team with Avery Johnson at quarterback, and the run game, it's a little bit better than Colorado. This one was really tough to pick because I think Kansas State is a more talented team. They got the run game to kind of move the ball really well against Colorado. But I think coming off a bye and still being relatively healthy, you would think at this point, it's a big advantage for Colorado. So this one's really tough, but ultimately I just lean with the team that I think is better based off of quality of talent. And then at Arizona, I think is a loss because last year, I think Colorado's at home. Arizona almost upset Arizona, was able to beat them. Both teams, I think, improve here. But I think the home environment for Arizona will be helpful. I think they've got the firepower to keep up with the Colorado, with the better wide receiver, maybe the better quarterback, and playmakers on the defensive side, which I think is ultimately the difference maker. I do think you beat Cincinnati, though. Colorado at home, even with the lack of depth they have here, they should be a more talented team than Cincinnati, so it shouldn't really hurt them. And I think you win. Then you get a bye week before going on the road against Texas Tech. Right now you're 4-4 team, 500. Got to find a way to win 2 of these last 4. Don't think you can beat Texas Tech. This is another really good run team, and they've got the perimeter talent, I think, to further expose Colorado defense. And I think Colorado will have to put up too many points to win this game that I don't think they'll be able to manage. And now you're under 500. You got to win 2 out of 3. Get a home game against Utah. And I think this is one of the last opportunities Colorado will have. I think this will be a good test because last year Colorado was really falling apart down the stretch. So there's potential for them to fully fall apart here. Or will we see improvement and they'll hold up together at the end of the season? I think we will see improvement, and I think they're able actually to pull an upset against their former Pac-12 rival, the Utah Utes. I think big Shedeur Sanders game here. I think I would just say if you're looking at a team like Colorado, when you have a quarterback like Sanders and playmakers like Travis Hunter, and they've got Jordan C in an O-line, not sure how much of impact he'll have, but they clearly have really talented players on the roster that I think you're able to get you at least one big win this year, and I haven't really picked them to do that yet, and I wanted to go with Utah here to do it, but then I don't think you pull off 2 in a row, and I think it's kind of an emotional win against Utah. I think you lose to Kansas, and I think you're playing Oklahoma State, fighting for bowl eligibility, but I think that O-line and run game is just too physical for Colorado, so you ultimately fall short of making a bowl, go 5-7. Probably a disappointing year for Colorado fans. Probably be a lot of toxic discourse around Deion Sanders. But I think from where the program was at when he took over, this is a major improvement, and I think they're clearly close to making a bowl game, and it will continue to improve the talent on this roster, the depth on this roster, and will take steps forward as a program. All right, so also being tied with Colorado here, we have the Baylor Bears. Their strengths, I think, are in the quarterback upside of DeQuan Finn. He's transferring him from Toledo, where he did some very good things, but an upgrade in competition leads to questions of how well he'll play. So I went with upside and not just quarterback. And then I think Dave Aranda made some good staff upgrades to try to, because of the team's failures last year. I think the staff is better. Weaknesses, I think your O-line and your D-line, both question marks. Not good in this Big 12 conference. Let's get into the schedule predictions. Tarleton State, think you got to win that. Don't know anything about Tarleton State, but Baylor should win. At Utah, don't see you winning that. Utah, especially at this point in the year, they'll be healthy. They'll have Cam Rising, you would think, fully back 100%. Improved skill positions. Very good team up in Utah. Well coached. Should beat you. Next year, playing Air Force at home. Air Force was really good last year. They do lose a little bit, but definitely a tricky game. I think at home, Baylor's able to win this game before losing at Colorado like that. Before getting into the schedule here. I think you beat Tarleton State. Don't know anything about them, but you got to win that game. Then at Utah, don't think you can win this game. Utah will be healthy at this point. You would think Cam Rising should be 100%. They're well coached, more talented. At home, this is a game Baylor should lose before playing Air Force. Tricky game. Air Force, very good last year. Do lose a little bit, and at home, I think Baylor will get the win. But it's a tricky game. Definitely not a gimme like Tarleton State. Already showed earlier at the Colorado section that I think you lose to Colorado. I think Shedeur is going to make big plays on his Baylor defense, and I think Baylor's not a team equipped to really expose Colorado's line of scrimmage issues. And then I think you do beat BYU, who also has line of scrimmage issues similar to Baylor. I think DeQuan Finn can make some big plays. And this is a game you win against a team that's on a similar level to you, but you got home field. Iowa State, not a team on a similar level to Baylor. I think they're better than Baylor. Got a good running back. You got Jalen Noel at receiver. You have other couple good receivers. Rocco Becht at quarterback. And the defense pretty solid. All of that at home, I think it beats you. Now you get your bye week. You're 3-3. Can you replicate that to get to a bowl? Let's see. First off, you got to Texas Tech, who I've talked about a little bit in this video already. They've got a really good running back. I think they've got good perimeter options, good tight end, solid quarterback. I think they put up too many points on this Baylor defense. Then Oklahoma State. This is a team really, I think it's going to be really physical, especially off on that O-line with Ollie Gordon. And I think they're able to beat next up, you're going to have Oklahoma State, a team that's very physical. You got Ollie Gordon at O-line that you think would be well equipped to run the ball against Baylor. But Baylor's at home here, and I do think the defensive line could be improving, or at least found guys who are making plays there. I think it'll come along as the season goes on at home. I mean, I just kind of have a feeling that Baylor's going to pull a big upset against one of the better teams in the Big 12, and I went with it here. Just kind of a gut feeling thing. Like on paper, Oklahoma State should win this game, but there's always going to be a few upsets every year that you don't see coming, or, most people don't see coming. I think this could be one of those. But then I think you lose at TCU. One, because you're going to be really excited beating one of the better teams in Oklahoma State, and you're just going to kind of fall back, or you're going to regress below the mean, I guess. I think you're going to have an emotional letdown even in a home game at TCU. Obviously, I think you could flip these games. They could lose Oklahoma State, who's the better team on paper. Both are at home, and then you could beat TCU, a team that doesn't is closer to Baylor's level, you would think. And that would make more sense, but I don't think college football always makes sense, and these games aren't played on paper. So I'm going to go with this order. Then you get a bye week before playing West Virginia, who I don't think you beat. Another really good run team. They got a couple backs there. I think Henderson, one of their names is. Um, Either I'm forgetting the names right now that come to me, but yeah, some really good running backs at West Virginia that I think are and team that's just gonna be too physical for Baylor. Donaldson, C.J. Donaldson, that's who it is. And then at Houston, I think it's another loss we showed earlier. I think Houston, is gonna get at least one or two Big 12 wins. I think it's one they're able to get. Big Donovan Smith game. But I do think you beat Kansas. One, because I think there's a potential that Kansas is beat up by the end of the year and not as good as they are at the start of the year. And I think they have some injury concerns at Kansas and lack depth. So I think the end of the season's a chance where Baylor could get them, and a final record of 5-7. All right, so next up, we have Kansas, who we just mentioned here, who their strengths are in their quarterback and their run game. Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal, I've talked about them earlier. And their weaknesses, as I just mentioned, are in their depth and health. The health around Jalen Daniels being the main concern, as he's gotten injured each of the past 2 years. And then depth being their depth of talent, because they have some really good playmakers, including Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal. But if those guys go down, they don't necessarily have the best talent around them. Or if some of their other starters go down, they don't necessarily have the best options on the depth chart behind them. Now getting to predictions, should beat Lindenwood, obviously, and I think they should beat Illinois. Even on the road, I think a healthy Kansas team with Jalen Daniels making plays, Devin Neal running the ball, is too dynamic for an Illinois team that doesn't have a lot going for them. And then UNLV on a Friday, pretty tough game, but UNLV is losing their quarterback, so I think they're still probably working out some kinks there. And Kansas at home on a Friday, think you win that before losing at West Virginia. It's one of those 50-50 games. I think you got a lot of them in the Big 12. Like I've said, mentioned earlier, I think it's the most well-balanced conference. So a lot of times I think you got to lean towards the home team when the games are so close. Both teams got a really good run game, solid quarterback. It's just a tough game to pick, and I just lean with West Virginia kind of having that home field advantage and winning it. But I think Kansas bounces back. I think they're better than TCU. I think they're at home. I think they'll be able to run the ball and Jalen Daniels make plays. And I think Kansas defense can perform well against TCU, which I don't think will be the most explosive offense. But I think you, unfortunately, playing your 6th straight game before that bye week, I think if the bye week had come earlier, I'd give them the win against Arizona State. But coming before the bye week, I think it's a bad spot for Kansas. Just a classic trap game, and I think you drop this one. But coming off the bye week, should beat Houston, and then you play a big game against your rival Kansas State. But I'll believe it when I see it. Kansas has not really come, or have they come close? But they haven't beaten Kansas State in what seems like forever. Don't know if they've actually beaten them in my lifetime. I think it's a loss. But you get another bye. Maybe you would like them more spaced out, but I don't mind it here because it's a pretty big game against Iowa State, who's a really good team, and I think the bye will give you a scheduling advantage over them, and you're at home, and I think being well rested, you're able to play one of your better games of the season and beat Iowa State. But I don't think you beat BYU. I talked about earlier about how BYU is going to get a couple wins, and I think Kansas is going to have. I think you'll beat Iowa State, play a really good game, then you'll kind of come back down to earth. And I think playing Iowa State, being the better team, you're going to give a lot of effort into that game. May not be able to get back up for BYU. Just not a great spot, I don't think. But I do think you beat Colorado because you're able to move the ball on the ground. And you're at home. I think it works out well for you. Then we already mentioned why I think they lose to Baylor. Like I said, Kansas is a team that I think could wear down by the end of the year. But I think Colorado's also a team like that, so it shouldn't hurt you too bad. And then BYU and Baylor aren't the best teams. So I could definitely see if Kansas is still fully healthy, I think you could definitely beat BYU and Baylor, and then you're looking at a 9-3 season. But I think Kansas is not quite the same team these final 3 weeks after the Iowa State game. I think you're going to kind of see them run out of gas a little bit. Just a prediction, could be wrong. If you could guarantee me Kansas has field the whole season, I'd probably pick them at least one more win here. but I'm going to go with 7-5. Still a good year for Kansas, especially from where they've been in just a few years ago. But maybe a little bit disappointing. But it's a really tough year in the Big 12 this year. All right, next up, finishing ahead of Kansas, I have the TCU Horned Frogs. I think the strengths, they got pretty good receiving production last year, and it's mostly coming back. And then I think Sonny Dykes made some staff improvements with the new hires that I think should get better coaching this year than they did last year. But the weakness is you lost a couple of top players in the secondary, and overall, I think it's like forced. I can't remember the exact number, but you're losing most of your starters off defense, and that's why I listed defensive experience as an issue. So first up, you're going to have Friday night road game. Don't like that to start the season. You're going to travel all the way to California. I mean, you're in Texas, but still, road trip on a Friday to kick off the season. I think TCU's a better team than Stanford. Just don't like the spot at all. I think Stanford beats them, but I think they clearly beat LIU. Another team I know nothing about, but it's a cupcake. Gotta win that. Home game against UCF. I think TCU actually wins this. I think Josh Hoover can perform well against the UCF defense, and I think the biggest weakness of TCU's defense is in the secondary, which I think UCF is not. That's not what UCF's going to want to do, is pass the ball. They're going to want to run the ball, which I think gives TCU a better chance of this game, and they're at home. But then Saturday on the road against SMU, a team that can definitely use the air raid and get the ball through the air. I think it's going to put up a lot of points and beat TCU. So next up, you're going to have Kansas on the road. I think Kansas also beats you. I think TCU can definitely compete in this game. I think it'll be close. I don't think Kansas will kill them through the air. But I think Kansas is a slightly better team and will come with the win. Then Houston at home on Friday. Like the spot, like the talent edge, like the team advantage. I think you win this. Then bye week. I think you need a bye week here, but I don't like having to go to Utah straight off the bye week. I would have liked if Texas Tech came first. And so I end up giving you a loss here at Utah, who I think is a better team. It's too hard to beat on the road in Utah. I think probably the toughest place to play in the Big 12 is going to be at Utah. And then Texas Tech would have liked it better if this game came off the bye, but it doesn't. And I think Texas Tech will be pretty effective throwing the ball against TCU, which will open up the run game. And I think Texas Tech just going to have a really good offense this year. And against some of the lesser defenses in the conference, they'll put up too many points to lose. And I think they'll beat you. But then I think you do win at Baylor. I mentioned earlier that I had Baylor beating Oklahoma State before this and then having a letdown here. So I think TCU wins. I don't think you beat Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State's just a really veteran team. And even though you're at home, I think Oklahoma State's just a really solid team that's better than TCU this year with that run game, the physical O-line. I think he's going to be able to move the ball against a lot of teams. And if Alan Bowman doesn't turn the ball over, which I'm not sure that TCU is going to be the best equipped to get turnovers, I think they'll be really tough to beat. So now you're 4-6. You need 2 wins to get to bowl eligibility. You get your bye week. I think a really good spot. I think being pretty, well prepared off a bye at home against who I rank the best team in the Big 12. I think it's a really tight game. I do actually think you pull the upset here and then beat Cincinnati, coming up with a huge 2 wins to get to 6-6 and make a bowl game. This would be like a great end of season for TCU and have really good vibes and a good energy around the program, getting 2 big wins and kind of salvage the season. Next up, we got West Virginia, tied for the 8th spot. Strengths of this room, going to be in that running back with Donaldson and White. And then returning production, including quarterback Garrett Green, who did a lot of nice things for West Virginia last year, who was kind of a surprise team. I thought they would be solid last year. Didn't expect them to be quite as good as they were, though. They even surpassed my expectations for them. I think the weaknesses are in the pass defense. I think it's inexperienced there, and it wasn't great last year, so I think there's question marks there. And then I put top talent. Definitely could have said depth of talent. I just don't think West Virginia is recruited very well to have talent across the board. And although I think Donaldson could be a top talent, I think aside from that, you don't really have like all American level players. And because of that, I'm actually going to predict you lose to Penn State, who, although they've struggled to beat, top Big Ten teams like Ohio State and Michigan, or, only Ohio State and Michigan, and you're at home, I do think the talent edge from Penn State's going to allow them to beat West Virginia just based on talent. But I think you beat Albany, and I think you beat Pittsburgh. Don't think Pittsburgh's very good this year. Don't think they'll be able to put up a lot of points on West Virginia or expose the pass defense. I think West Virginia wins, and I think you beat Kansas because, again, I don't know how well Kansas will. I don't know. I think they can move the ball through the air. Don't know if they'll fully expose it. And then I think you'll be able to run the ball against Kansas. I think Garrett Green will play well. I think you win. You get a bye week, a little early. Don't love it. Would have liked it more before the Iowa State game. But coming off the bye on the road in Stillwater, got to give you a loss there. I think Oklahoma State's a better team this year. And at home, I don't see them losing this game. But then you get a really big home game against Iowa State, who I've talked about, I think, has a lot of young players who are improving at running back, at wide receiver, at quarterback. I think the O-line's good. I think there's talent on defense. Really, really good team this year who could do some really great things. But I think at home, I think West Virginia actually wins this game. I think this 4-game stretch here, by the way, at Oklahoma, Iowa State, Kansas State, at Arizona, maybe the toughest any team has in the Big 12 all year. But I think West Virginia is a good enough team to get maybe one, maybe two of these. I think Iowa State's one you can get. And now you're 4-2. I think you also beat Kansas State. Now this would be two really, really big wins in a row against teams I have in my preseason top 25. I think you're at home here. If I'm predicting this to happen, but I could definitely see a world where you only win one of these, just because winning 2 games against top 25 teams back-to-back is hard to do. But I think West Virginia's a really good team, and at home I think they're able to get it done. But I don't think they're able to win 3 in a row, and that's why I have you losing at Arizona. Ultimately, this 4-game stretch, 2 at home, 2 on the road, I think West Virginia, you're happy to just split here because I could definitely see 1 and 3. But I think you're able to go 2-2 here and go into your second bye at 5-3. Pretty solid start to the year considering difficulty of schedule. And then off the bye, I think your bye's in a good spot because that stretch is just brutal. So you got to refresh from that. And then you get a pretty easy game against Cincinnati relative to those last 4. Baylor, also not bad. I think you win that. UCF, I think you also win that. You get home games. I really like the way the schedule ends for them. If West Virginia can survive that middle stretch, I think it sets up really nicely. West Virginia's schedule, as you can see, is just broken up into thirds, and you survive that middle third, and the back half, the last third's not too difficult. But I don't think you're able to beat Texas Tech, who I've talked about. I've talked very highly of Texas Tech this whole video. Don't need to rehash that. I think you go 8-4. A very good season for West Virginia football. Next up, also tied for 8th place. Spoiler alert, you're going to see a lot of teams here tied for 8th place. Utah, I think they have strengths at quarterback with Cam Rising. I think the defense should be really, really good. And always coaching with Kyle Whittingham there for maybe his last season. And then weaknesses, I put dynamic wide receiver as question because they do bring in a couple transfers, including Dorian Singer, who was formerly All Pac-12 first team from Arizona, but was a little bit disappointing at USC. And then the D-line isn't quite as good as you would think a Utah D-line would typically beat. But the team definitely should beat Southern Utah, and I've already said I think they beat Baylor. Also, I think they're clearly a better team than Utah State. So I think they get off to a pretty easy 3-0 start before their first challenge at Oklahoma State, a team that I think is going to run the ball pretty well. But I think ultimately Alan Bowman might make a few costly plays here where Cam Rising might make a few crucial plays, like in a clutch way. I think I kind of lean, because I think this will be a close game, but I trust Cam Rising more than I do Alan Bowman. And I think Utah actually gets a tough win at Oklahoma State. But then I think they drop a home game to Arizona. Um, Arizona gets a bye right before this game, so I think scheduling favors Arizona. Now, if you wanted to say they lose their road game at Oklahoma State, win it home against Arizona, definitely see that. Pretty reasonable. But I think you actually get the tough road win, but aren't able to get the home win before getting a bye and what's a good spot before a trap game. And you're just a better team than ASU, and you'll be refreshed off a bye. Better than TCU as well, and you're better than Houston. So this next 3-game stretch should be pretty light, and you should come out of there with 3 wins, I would expect. And now you're 7-1 with 4 games left, looking like a potential playoff team, maybe the favorite to win the Big 12 at this point. You get another bye and another fairly easy game against BYU relative to the teams you could get in the Big 12 here. But then we've already mentioned, I think Shedeur Sanders has a really big game, pulls an upset against a Utah team that's 8-1, maybe ranked inside the top 10. I think it's kind of just a really disappointing game for Utah. Bad performance. I don't think they play their best here. It's just kind of, I just got a feeling they're going to have a letdown here on this part of the schedule. I do think they bounce back in a really hard-fought win against Iowa State before losing that road Friday night game. Don't like the spot. Don't like any of the season on road on a Friday against a really good UCF team. So I got Utah going 9-3. Probably the team I struggled the most with here. I was really, really close to going 10-2. I could easily be talked into giving them the Colorado game or the UCF game. I do think you lose one of the Oklahoma State, Arizona games, but I think you split that. And then UCF, I feel I was leaning more towards loss, but I was really close to going 10-2 here. Also tied for 8th. Like I said, you'll notice the theme. UCF, strengths, that running back room. You've got Boone transferring in. You got Harvey. I think probably like over 2,000 or over 3,000 something yard. Definitely over 3,000 yards returning from their running back group, which is crazy. And then you throw in KJ Jefferson at quarterback, really physical runner, tough to bring down. I think any team that struggles against the run is going to struggle against UCF. And then ironically, weaknesses are, I think, that run defense, which is not ideal in this Big 12. I've talked about how good their running backs are with Donaldson at West Virginia, Devin Neal at Kansas. I've mentioned Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State. We'll talk about Taj Brooks at Texas Tech a little bit later. And then UCF, obviously. Iowa State's got a good run game. I mentioned Kansas State, just running backs. Great running games all over the Big 12. Which is why, sidetrack here. The Big 12, I think, so many teams have good running games. Any team that has a quarterback really step up could definitely take control of the conference. And then I'm not sure how good the O-line is, also ironically, but I'm not sure how much. And this is more pass protection because I think running the ball, they'll be fine. And then getting the schedule, easy 2-game start. New Hampshire, Sam Houston should be easy wins. But then a pretty steep step up in competition against TCU. I think it's a loss. I guess you could work out some kinks in those first 2 games. But it seems like a TCU team that's already played some better teams with Stanford week 1. So one okay team. Is going to be ready for UCF a little more. And they're on the road. I just think they're a little more prepared. You get an early bye that I think allows you to beat Colorado. Definitely think you'll be able to run the ball against Colorado. But then playing Florida, I think Florida still has better athletes clearly than UCF and will be just kind of out-physical, out-athlete them. And I think it's a loss. And then I think you do beat Cincinnati here because I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think Cincinnati, one of the weaker teams in the Big 12 this year. I think you'll run the ball well. I think it'll be an easy win. And now you're sitting at 4-2 before playing an Iowa State team on the road, who I think one of the better teams in this conference. UCF is too, but I think Iowa State at home in Ames, Rocco Becht. I just got to give it to Iowa State here. I really like Iowa State this year, and I think at home there it's going to be too tough to beat. Do think you beat BYU. And now you're playing your 5th game in a row, which I don't love. But I think Arizona, I ranked them as the best team in the Big 12. I do think they could be a little bit vulnerable in the run defense. Um, you're at home in Orlando, and I think I gotta give it the win to UCF here. Really big game. Was really close to giving it to Arizona, but I don't know. I got a feeling UCF can get this one, and I think you also are just clearly better than ASU. You come off a bye, and I've already shown I thought they lose to West Virginia, because West Virginia, I think in that final third, is doing really well. And then I think they beat Utah because of the Friday night home situation, run the ball well, really good environment there on Friday night. I think they go 8-4. All right, next I get to talk about Texas Tech, who I think's one of the, I would say probably the most underrated team in the Big 12. I think you got really good strengths at skill positions because I think Taj Brooks is one of the best one of the best running backs in the country, and also the Big 12. I think could be the best. You probably lean Ollie Gordon, Devin Neal's up there, but I think he's on that level. And then I think you bring in Josh Kelly from Washington State, a wide receiver, and he's a true number one. Micah Hudson, 5-star wide receiver, I think is going to be an instant impact true freshman. Really good number two. Then Jalen Conyers transfers in at tight end. I think he's really good. And I think they open up the game for other options to also emerge. And then I think Morton, I thought what I saw from him last year in limited play time, no, he was up and down. But I think I see the talent. I think with these weapons, he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. I think he'll put up really good numbers on a really good team. Now, the weaknesses are on the defense, where the D-line loses players. Overall, you lose a lot of defensive experience. There's definitely question marks there. Maybe you figure it out, some players emerge, but at least to start this season, there's a lot of what looked like weaknesses on that defense. But you should beat Abilene Christian, and then at Washington State, Josh Kelly, I mentioned, transferred in from there. I think this is actually where he kind of burst onto the scene against his former team. Huge game. I think you win. And I think you beat North Texas. I think you also beat Arizona State. I think this is a really, really, really favorable opening four games. You get 3 of them at home. I think you're a superior team in all of them. And I think you're able to, whatever weaknesses you might have, I think are being worked out against weaker competition. And I think it continues against Cincinnati. You get off to a 5-0 start. But then I think the only downside to this, I would say, is when you go on to go to Arizona, you're all the teams you played, you've been clearly better than. So I think the step up in competition hurts, and it's on the road. I think you lose. But then 5-1, you get a bye week before Baylor. I think you beat Baylor. And then I think you beat TCU as well, because both teams I don't think will be able to keep up offensively and don't have the defensive ability to stop Texas Tech. But I do think Iowa State does. I think the defense slows down Texas Tech, probably makes some mistakes, and I think is equipped well enough offensively to move the ball pretty well against Texas Tech. Similar to Arizona, I think, with Fafita and McMillan, will be able to expose more of the defense of Texas Tech in the way the other teams won't be able to. Colorado, I think, will move the ball, but also won't stop anything. I think this will be a shootout that I think Texas Tech will come out with before a bye week. Then going to Oklahoma State off the bye, I think I was really, really close to giving Texas Tech this win, but ultimately the O-line with Ollie Gordon, so physical. And I think we'll be able to just kind of it'll be a time of possession thing where it's kind of wear out Texas Tech. But I do think you beat West Virginia when you come back home, and you finish the season 9-3, which I would say is a great year for Texas Tech. I think you got a favorable schedule. It was really close to going 10-2. I think they're underrated, are a team that could make some serious noise in the Big 12. All right, also tied for 8th place, which I guess kind of gives away some of the prediction here. So I have a lot of teams tied for 8th here. You're already seeing UCF. West Virginia, Utah, and Texas Tech. And now Oklahoma State, all tied for this 8th spot. So I think the strengths of this team, as I mentioned throughout the video, are in their offensive line and their running back. I think all 5 starters are back, and you got Ollie Gordon, maybe the best running back in the country. Weaknesses, I think the defensive line has some question marks. I don't think it was great last year. And then at quarterback, I think Alan Bowman had too many turnovers last year, so they need to cut that down severely for not be considered a weak point of the team. So getting to the schedule predictions here, I think you start off with a win against South Dakota State. Maybe the best FCS program currently, so it could be tricky, but I think you're able to out-physical them. And I think you're also able to do the same against Arkansas, who I think is one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. And I think Oklahoma State with these 2 home games should start 2-0. I think you're also clearly better than Tulsa. And I think against all these first 3 teams, just based off running the ball alone, should be able to win. I don't think, however, you'll be able to do that against Utah. I think Alan Bowman will have to make some plays to win the game. I don't trust him to do that against a Utah team that should have a quarterback edge with Cam Rising and have playmakers I trust like Keithy at tight end to make a big catch. So I'm going with Utah to win the game. I'm also going with Kansas State to beat you. Another team I think with the quarterback edge, I think Avery Johnson's going to be really good this year. And I think Alan Bowman's just not going to be able to make enough plays to beat Kansas State on the road. But I do think you can beat West Virginia. I talked about it earlier. Home game, move the ball running it. I think you should win that. And then I think you get a really good bye spot here before what I would have thought of as a classic trap game on the road on a Friday against BYU after, 6 straight games. But because of the bye, I think you beat BYU. I did pick a loss at Baylor. Because I think one of these games in this 4-game stretch against some lighter competition, I was sensing kind of an upset here. Maybe they do go 4-0, but I thought you lose one of them, and I was between Baylor and TCU. I went with Baylor. I think you beat ASU and TCU. All 4 of these teams, Oklahoma State's better than, and on paper should win. But I thought one of them would get the upset. I just went with Baylor. Then you get a bye week before finish off the season, where I've already shown I think they beat Texas Tech and Colorado. I think Colorado's worn down by the end of the year. I think they moved the ball well against Texas Tech and are at home. And they're also off a bye, which negates Texas Tech having a bye advantage. I think Oklahoma State gets to 9-3, just like the past few teams. Now, also tied for 8th place. I said I think it's the most well-balanced conference. Iowa State. Strengths, all the returning talent they have. I mentioned Noel. They got another wide receiver. Can't remember his name right now. I'll pull it up. But they've also got Rocco Beck there. So that's why I put quarterback as a strength, because I think last year he showed a lot of potential and was also just good already, and I think he should improve. And then weaknesses, I think depth could be an issue just because Iowa State doesn't recruit the best. So if players get injured, I'm not sure they have the best replacements to to step in and just fill in seamlessly. And then the receiver, Higgins really good. But Higgins and Noel, really good combo. Is it Higgins? Yeah. So that receiver duo, really good. And then another weakness, the D-line, one of the only spots on the team. Well, so the secondary lost some good players too, but they also have really good players back there that I don't think makes it a weakness. But the defensive line, kind of bringing in some new faces. How good will it be? I don't know. That's why I put a question mark. Still think they're good enough to beat North Dakota. And then head into the Cy-Hawk Bowl against Iowa. Typically, Iowa wins this game from, I think, can only remember one time recently when Iowa State won it. So typically, Iowa wins this game. I was at home. But I think Iowa State actually is going to win it this year. I think they've got better receivers. I think they've got a better quarterback. I better running back, maybe the better O-line, and I don't think Iowa's defense is good enough to make up for all of that. Now you get a really early bye week, which I don't love, but I do think, I don't think it's the worst, but I don't think you really needed it before Arkansas State. And then Houston, also just not great. I think you win that as well. And Baylor, I think you win here as well. I think if Iowa State wins the Iowa game, which is not a game, definitely a tough game, they should start 5-0 and be set up really well to contend to win the Big 12, which I do think they're capable of doing. But I think after a 5-game start, 5-win start, I think you lose at West Virginia with Garrett Green and Donaldson, which maybe puts that defensive front to the test the most so far and kind of shows the flaw in Iowa State more. And then UCF, I think, does some of the same with their running game, but I think Iowa State's able to, at home, perform better offensively than they are on the road at West Virginia against, I think, a slightly worse defense in UCF. And I think also after West Virginia makes some adjustments schematically to help defend against the run in UCF, and I think they win. Then you get a really good bye week before Texas Tech. That I think just the scheduling advantage against a similar caliber team in Texas Tech gives the edge to Iowa State in my mind, and is what led me to pick them. But I went with Kansas to beat Iowa State. Once again, really good run game, and just that not having a scheduling advantage here, and I think just playing a really tight game on the road, I tend to favor the home team in Kansas. Do think you clearly beat Cincinnati. Do think you lose to Utah, though, who I think probably a slightly better team, but very similar. And once again, with all these teams in the Big 12 being so close together, a lot of times I find myself having to lean the home team just because winning on the road is so hard in college football, which ends up being why I picked them to beat Kansas State and finish 9-3. Iowa State's a team, I think the start's really, really favorable. But at the end, like Texas Tech, Kansas, Utah, Kansas State, 2 home, 2 away, I think you split those. Maybe you lose Kansas State and you beat Kansas. Kansas State's probably a little better than Kansas. Ultimately, I went with Iowa State's able to win their home games and lose their road games. But, maybe it goes differently. But I'm going 9-3 for Iowa State. Now, no longer tied in 8th place. We have Kansas State Wildcats finishing 2nd. All right, so the strengths here, we have a quarterback. I think Avery Johnson has a very, very good shot to be the best quarterback in the Big 12. I think the running back room of Dylan Edwards and DJ Gibbons, nice thunder and lightning. And then the weaknesses, though, I think the O-line has some questions, and I don't think they have the most dynamic wide receiver room. However, none of that really matters against UT Martin. I don't really know anything about UT Martin, didn't research their team, but Kansas State should clearly win that. However, I don't think you clearly beat Tulane. I think Ty Thompson, I expect to win the Tulane job, transfer from Oregon, who's very highly recruited coming out. They bring in Mario Williams, formerly of USC and Oklahoma, who I think boosts their receiver room, which I think is already pretty good. Running back's pretty good. I think you actually lose to Tulane in an upset here. I think Tulane, one of the best group of 5 teams, having home field advantage in Louisiana. With the quality, I think they just have really good players that people are overlooking. I think they beat Kansas State here. But home, Friday game, you know what I'm doing. Win for Kansas State at home on Friday night against Arizona. I'm sure Arizona can make some plays, keep it close. But yeah, the home Friday game, it's too tough. And then I think you beat BYU just because of, the overall team is just better, talent edge. And I think you beat Oklahoma State at home because this is a game where I think it's close. But Alan Bowman, I lean with the quarterback edge here. And in my mind, Avery Johnson's going to outplay Alan Bowman. Then I think you get a really good bye week to avoid a trap against Colorado. Not even a trap, but just a tough game on the road. And I think the bye week before really helped. I think you get the win. And then at West Virginia, I don't think you get the win, but I do think you beat your rival in Kansas. This is a tough 3-game stretch here. It's just hard to win back-to-back road games, which is why I went with West Virginia. But you tend to beat your rival in Kansas. So I went with the win there. Then you're better than Houston. You win. Get a bye week to finish the season strong. You've only got 2 losses. You're sitting at, I believe, 7-2. It's all going to come down to finish. Arizona State, Cincinnati. 2 easy. I don't want to say easy, but I think Kansas State should clearly beat both teams. But I do think you dropped the last game against Iowa State. So if you finish 9-3 like the other teams, but one of those losses out of conference, so I think you finish higher in the standings. The Arizona Wildcats were a huge surprise team in 2023. But will they be able to continue that success with a new coach in 2024? Let's look into it. So if we're looking at the strengths of this team, I would say the biggest strength is that they have the best wide receiver in the country, in my opinion. I think you could definitely argue Luther Burden or Tez Johnson at Oregon and Missouri, respectively. Luther Burden at Missouri, Tez Johnson at Oregon. And there's other great wide receivers, but in my opinion, Tatora McMillan of Arizona is the best in the country. Really big receiver, huge catch radius. I think he's going to be a first-team All-American this year. And then I think the other big strength of this team is potentially a Heisman-level quarterback in Noah Fafita. So he's undersized, probably about 5'9 to 5'11. It's probably his height range. Don't know exactly how tall he is. But he's definitely undersized. But when he replaced Jaden DeLora last year, he put up really big numbers. And U of A kind of started taking off. They almost beat USC and Washington. And then they did beat Utah, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon State, UCLA. So they started running off a bunch of wins. And that was when the program really took a turn in the right direction. But so with him and McMillan, U of A could potentially have the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the country and definitely in the Big 12. If I'm looking at the weaknesses, I think the first thing I look at is the defensive line, just because it's not the most proven group. And then I think most of the other position groups on U of A are actually pretty solid. Offensive line, you do lose a player to the NFL, but you have your left tackle there should be, I think, some projected first-round pick right now. I don't know how to say it. It's a hard name to pronounce, but it's like Savaiania or something. It's hard to pronounce. But so the O-line, with him leading them, should actually be pretty solid. And then you bring in San Jose State transfer at running back, and then you also have some other recruits in that group that are all very fast. It should be one of the fastest running back groups in the country. And then I already talked about the wide receiver group and quarterback. And then on defense, I think the secondary is led by Takario Davis, who should be one of the best cornerbacks in the country. And then Justin Flo's still there at linebacker. So I think, and there's other playmakers on defense as well, but I think the main hole would be on that defensive front. And then the other weakness that I could see is the coach. With Jedd Fisch leaving, I think Brennan will be a good coach coming from San Jose State. But I think it's still a question mark because he hasn't coached at the Power 4 level. So now getting into the predictions. Now before I do this, I do root for Arizona, but I try to do these predictions without any bias. So this is what I believe will happen, and I try to make these predictions without any bias. So I think they open the season with a big win against New Mexico. I think it should be a pretty comfortable win for U of A, and they should also beat NAU. I think you look at this Arizona roster with the offensive firepower here and the playmakers at defense, they should be able to win both these games. But then you travel on the road to Kansas State. Kansas State will be led by Avery Johnson at quarterback, who I think, along with Noah Fafita, and then Rocco Beck, Shedeur Sanders, maybe a Jalen Daniels. I don't know. The Big 12 has a lot of good quarterbacks actually, but Avery Johnson could be the best of them. with how dynamic he is as a runner as well. And keep in mind, Will Howard's going to start for Ohio State, and he most likely transferred out because Avery Johnson was going to start over him. And then on the road, on a Friday, Kansas State's going to have a good defense, home field advantage, and just as dynamic a quarterback. Maybe not as good as the perimeter, as good on the perimeter, but probably better in the running back stable with Dylan Edwards coming in and then Gibbons already being there. And I think Kansas State's rushing attack is too much for Arizona's defensive front, and I think Kansas State's able to beat Arizona. And then you get your first bye week of the year, a good spot because back-to-back road games against Kansas State and Utah would have been very tough. So I think it's a good spot for your first bye week. And I think actually with the rest advantage and extra preparation for Utah, I think you get a really big win on the road in Salt Lake City. Utah's going to be really good this year. Cam Rising, assuming Cam Rising's fully healthy. And then the skill positions are better with Keithy coming back from injury at tight end. Dorian Singer, formerly an all-conference receiver for U of A in the Pac-12, is going to be at Utah. But Utah should be a lot better on offense, actually. And then you always trust that defense under Kyle Whittingham. But I think they're similar level of teams. And I think Arizona put up a few more points. And because of the rest advantage is the main reason I'm giving them here. Before what I think is another really tough game. I think potentially the three best teams Arizona will play are all in a row right here. With Kansas State, Utah, Texas Tech would probably be the three teams I consider to be the best. So the Texas Tech game at home, I think Texas Tech can put up a lot of points with Kelly and Hudson and Conyers and those receiver and tight ends, and then Brooks at running back. I think Morton's going to take a big step up at quarterback, but I don't know how good their defense will be. I think Fafita, McMillan, those speedy running backs for Arizona put up a lot of points as well. And I think home field, and then me knowing that U of A is going to have a guy like Takario Davis on defense or a Justin Flo, or I think there's just a few more playmakers I trust on U of A's defense for at home to make a few, maybe get a turnover or a big stop to win at home and improve to 4-1. And then I think you win at BYU because I don't think BYU can keep up. I don't think they have a physical enough offensive line to dominate time of possession. So I think they'll have to put up points to keep up with U of A, and I don't think they're capable of that offensively. However, a team that is capable of that, in my opinion, is the Colorado Buffaloes. You're going to have Shedeur Sanders at quarterback, obviously very good. Travis Hunter playing both sides of the ball. A lot of top-end talent at Colorado, but depth's always a question. This is in the middle of the year. I think this is a good game, but I do think Arizona is a better team. I think Colorado will keep it close. Shedeur will make some big plays. Travis Hunter might make some big plays, but I think Arizona is going to get the win here. And then I think a home game against West Virginia, another tough game. So this is it's kind of stacking up to the point where you wish maybe that bye week wasn't as early. But I think you get one more win at home against West Virginia. Garrett Green, C.J. Donaldson there. Pretty good running attack, but I don't know how good their passing attack will be. Don't know how good their defense will be. Now, I think they'll play U of A tough, but in Tucson, I like the Wildcats. Then after the West Virginia game, you're going to have a road game against UCF, and I think at this point, the tough games are just piling up, and I think it's going to be too much. You get lost. I think the fact that UCF has a really good rushing attack with Harvey and Boone at running back and then Jefferson at quarterback, which I think will give Arizona's defense struggles because I'm not sure they have the best run-stopping ability. And then the fact that there'll be so many tough games in a row for Arizona during the stretch that I think they'll be a little worn out. And you would like the bye to come 1 week earlier here, but it doesn't. So I think you're going to get your second loss this season to UCF. And now you get your second bye. Coming off of that, you get a home Friday night game against Houston, who I think is on the lower end of Big 12 teams this year. And at home, U of A should beat. Now a big road game at TCU. I think Arizona's a better team than TCU, but TCU is going to have the bye advantage here. And I think with that bye advantage, they're going to make just enough plays to come up with an upset win. I think they'll be desperate at the end of the year here trying to get to a bowl, and it'll kind of fuel them to a big win against Arizona. But Arizona will finish strong, defeating their rival Arizona State. Arizona State, not a very good team this year. U of A should clearly win, finish the season 9-3. And with the Kansas State game not being a conference game, just 2 Big 12 losses should be good enough to send them to the Big 12 championship. Make sure to check out my full Big 12 predictions video to see my Big 12 championship predictions. And then check out, as you see, I have it tied for first here. And then a bunch of teams tied for third. I have 6 teams tying for third place. And you see the rest of this. And now we have our conference title, a rematch between the Wildcats of Arizona and the Wildcats of Kansas State. Avery Johnson, Noah Fifita. I think Kansas State's going to have dynamic running backs. I think Arizona's going to be dynamic in the passing game. And I think neutral site. I think Arizona's a better team here. I think they're going to put up a lot of yards to the air, challenge this Kansas State defense, and win the Big 12. That's it for these predictions. I thank you all for watching. If you want further college football predictions, I have videos on all 4 of the power conferences, as well as full playoff predictions coming out, and full end of season predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.